Good evening and welcome to City of Pasco Council Workshop Meeting. The Council thanks you for being part of our city government. At workshop meetings, the Council discusses issues but no formal action is taken. Agenda packets are available on the City of Pasco's website at www.pasco-wa/agenda. -wa.gov/agenda, or they can be found at the back table. This meeting is being televised live on PSC-TV channel 191 on Spectrum Cable in Pasco and Richland, and is streamed on the city's Facebook page, website, YouTube channel, and GoToWebinar. This and previous council meeting video is available on the city's website. Lastly, the public may submit their comments and or questions by contacting the city manager, city clerk, or by using City of Pasco app. And with that, we have a very special group joining us today. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. We will be taking roll call first.
All right, council members Brown,
Present.
Campos, Mr.
Campos is excused.
Milne,
Present.
Roach,
Ms. Roach is excused this evening.
Serrano.
We've not heard from Mr. Serrano yet.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem Maloney
Present.
and Mayor Barajas.
Present.
4 counted for, Mayor.
Thank you. And we will now move forward to introducing a very special group of girls joining us this evening. We welcome the Girl Scouts tonight to celebrate Day of the Girl, established a decade ago by the United Nations to remind the world how special girls are to making the world a better place. The theme this year is Our Time is Now, Our Rights, Our Future. Thank you for that. We appreciate the Girl Scouts joining us tonight, finishing their membership year in September as the best year ever. Their membership is as big as it was in 2014, and Pasco is leading the way with new school troops starting at Virgie Robinson Elementary and Marie Curie STEM Elementary. And I was honored to help open a Girl Scout retail store in the proud city, in our city last January on Burden, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. On behalf of the City Council, we appreciate you taking the time to come in tonight to start our workshop by leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Mayor, is it okay if I just have a stand right here and face the flag?
Absolutely. If you'd all please join me and the girls in the Pledge of Allegiance.
All right, girls, we are proud here to introduce you to some of our amazing Girl Scouts from Pasco. Over to you, girls. Go ahead and start it. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, girls. Mayor, thank you for that introduction. As mentioned, you know what? We're 65,000 square miles wide, but all roads lead through Pasco for our success, and that is absolutely a true statement. And last year, when we weren't here because we were virtual, but when we were trying to support you all and be online, we didn't have a store down here, and we were just starting troops within a couple of your schools. And we have grown to over 100 girls in your local schools here. We have more than 100 girls out in your local community. And it was our best year ever, as you said. Our membership has climbed on up. And we're making more girls out there who are proud of their community, proud to stand up strong, and proud to make the world a better place. And we couldn't have happened without you, Mayor, and the rest of your team saying, let's do this. Thank you for opening up our stores. Our sales have been up across the board. We've had a lot of community citizens come on in, not only in Pasco, Tri-Cities, but also from as far away as Oregon, have traveled up here because we're a lot closer to a lot of areas in Oregon than we are to Portland. And so a lot of folks have come up to your community and say, Pasco rocks. Thanks again, girls, for making the world a better place. Today is your day. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, girls. Thank you for joining us.
We left some cookies over there for your staff, and then here's some more cookies for the city council members.
Thank you.
And I've given a coin for your service, Mayor, as well.
Thank you very much.
Again, thank you all. These girls aspire to be you all to serve their communities. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but these are going home with me. Now we're sharing.
It's too bad we're missing some council members. They missed out on
They missed out, correct. All right, well, thank you again. Very, very honored to have you here today. City Manager Dave Zabel.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I did want to make you aware, Mayor, that Councilmember Serrano had been in contact with the Deputy City Manager and I earlier today and advised us he wasn't going to be here, and I just didn't get a chance to catch you before the meeting. So.
Okay. We will take note of that. Thank you for that. And with that, we will move on directly into executive session. So our first item is the discussion with legal counsel about current or potential litigation per RCW 42.30.1101I, and for 30 minutes. So we will be in executive session from 7:06 to 7:36. Thank you. It is 8:01:30 and our executive session is concluded, so we will move on with the rest of our items for discussion. Moving on to item number 5, any verbal reports from council members? Councilmember Milne.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, this last week I did attend virtually the Pasco Business Advisory Council. In short, some of the things that Michael Gonzalez talked about was putting together a plan for buildings that were vacant that people would be able to contact, and then they would be able to find out who owns the buildings. It was kind of like in the preliminary stages of it, but it was a good idea. We talked about, trying to get more people in the downtown and fill up some of these vacant buildings. And then we also talked about recruiting other members for the DPDA as far as there's some vacancies on that as well, and see what we could do to get other business owners involved. And then on Wednesday night, I did have an Ivy Glades HOA meeting, and I had the privilege of being there with John, and I hope I don't mess this up, Pedboric. And, okay, and it was a really good meeting. I really appreciated him coming out. We were able to talk about a lot of interesting things that people had questions, and he was a big help with that because there's stuff that he knows that I don't know, and I really do appreciate it, and I appreciate him moving up in leadership as our new city engineer. So yeah, not trying to steal his thunder, but I do really appreciate it. So that was my week.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Barajas. These last couple of weeks have been busy. Genuinely, in the evenings, I don't think I've had any less than 3 meetings in any given week beyond the council meeting. So it's been a busy time for us. Last Tuesday, we had another listening session regarding retail sale of cannabis. So that was really interesting. I think there's a lot of perspectives in the room and some comments made. I think that were I think maybe missing the mark a little bit in terms of our engagement and our interest and ability to listen. I think we had a total of maybe 5 council members there at one point in time. So anyone who thinks that we as a council are not listening, I would suggest that you look again at our level of engagement. I do hope that we can move forward on getting some answers. I think we have an item later on the agenda to chat a little bit more about what other information we as a council may be looking for. And then also on Wednesday the 5th, in the evening we had the Downtown Master Plan open house. So that was a digital presentation of the Downtown Master Plan. So I attended that. It is a well put together master plan. I know so often people feel like the city is moving very slowly on a whole lot of things. That can be true, and often that's deliberation. But we are now getting in place a full set of master plans that align with our comp plan, that align with our vision, and then are implemented through our budget and through our other efforts. So I'm excited for what that looks like. I'm excited to hear the full presentation. And I'm excited to get going on making sure that we as a council make sure to put the budget appropriate to implement that plan and get it going. So I'm really excited about that. It sounds like the community was really excited and engaged in that as well. That's all I have today. Thank you.
Thank you. No further report. I do actually have a report to share. Friday was the Tri-Cities Hispanic Chamber of Commerce Noche de Éxitos, Night of Achievements, where City Manager Dave Zabel received the Lifetime Career Achievement Award. Thank you so much for all your years and dedication to not only City of Pasco, but every other city you've worked at. Also attended the Masquerade Ball for the state-anchored recovery services. Mr. John Penny and the Grambois family here were so gracious to invite me. And again, it was a fundraiser event to create opportunities for people that are in recovery, people that are coming out of situations where there's no opportunities for them for employment, for housing, or, services, really, basic services. So it was in attendance again, and so if any of you do hear more about state-anchored recovery services or are curious to know about state-anchored recovery services, reach out to Mr. John Penny, and I'm happy to provide that contact information to you. And that is all I have to report. So we'll move on to item 6. Now we're getting to the items for discussion. First item is the public forum for formation of Broadmoor Tax Increment Area, and we have City Manager Dave Zabel.
Good evening again, Mayor, Council. So with us tonight, Bob Stowe of Stowe Development and Strategies is going to give us a presentation on this. And while he makes his way up, I'll note that Council passed a resolution authorizing staff to move forward on a TIF back in May. And since then, the city has worked with area property owners to identify appropriate TIF infrastructure improvements, as well as prepared through Mr. Stowe a project analysis for the Broadmoor Tax Increment Area. That has since been reviewed by the Treasurer's Office. They completed their review and assessment just in the last month or so, clearing the way for council consideration of enacting the TIA by ordinance. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob for his presentation.
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening, Council, Mayor. Pleasure to be with you here again tonight to talk about tax increment financing. This is the agenda that I'd like to review with you.
If you can press the button.
Sorry.
You go.
So I'm excited to be here with you again this evening, talk about tax increment financing. The agenda that I would propose, the bulk of it is to talk about the project analysis, but I do want to spend just a couple minutes talking about TIF in general, just as a precursor before we get into the project analysis, and then talk a little bit about the ordinance. So you all remember the presentations provided previously. I know you've read the information in the packet, but tax increment financing is a financial tool that's designed to take the increment taxes that result from increased assessed valuation from development as a result of infrastructure investments. And so it's those revenues that the city uses then to pay for the infrastructure investments. It doesn't harm any of the existing taxing districts. They'll continue to get the same taxes that they received under current law. They just don't receive the taxes associated with the development above the base. So real quickly, it's available to cities, counties, and ports. It's a really powerful economic development tool, as you'll see and have read in the project analysis. It's designed really for projects that are ready to be built rather than form a tax increment area and then hope that development occurs. It does have a nexus between the infrastructure and the private development. It's called the but-for requirement, and that's laid out in the project analysis. And the important piece of all of this is that these are taxes that are generated from regular property taxes. They're only that are necessary to fund the public infrastructure, and it's no impact on individual property tax owners. These are the types of improvements. They're generally the things that you would find under sort of any kind of horizontal development, roads, underneath the roads, etc. Key elements, just want to point out you can have no more than 2 increment areas at any one time, and they cannot overlap. You cannot have an increment area that's more than $200 million of assessed valuation. You cannot change the boundary after you form the tax increment area, and you cannot add any public improvements beyond those that you identify within your ordinance once you've adopted that ordinance. And the other key point is that you can't have an increment area that outlasts any of the public improvement costs. In other words, if you're going to issue debt for 25 years, that's the maximum time for the increment area. If you're going to issue debt for 20 years, that's the maximum time. The levy rate inside the increment area is the same as outside the increment area. So no change. Taxpayers pay the same amount that they're going to pay. So how is this being funded? Well, it's being funded by those who develop, the developers in the increment area, because they have development, private development now occurring as a result of your infrastructure investments. So this is the private development of the Broadmoor tax increment area. It's 671 acres. 451 of those acres are gross acres that are available for development. The balance is result of the area that's in the brown. That's the gravel pit, and that will become available for redevelopment several years into the future once a reclamation plan is completed on that site. The infrastructure needs, and these are detailed in the ordinance and more detailed in the actual project analysis. The ordinance simply has a general reference for the improvements, which will be determined later based on development interest, but the project analysis gets very specific in terms of the improvements that are necessary. But it includes key corridors and intersections, Interstate 182 at Road 100, and then water, sewer, and stormwater facilities throughout the site. And that's $39 million, which is what has been determined that would be necessary to stimulate the proposed private development. The private development also has investments to make, and that's estimated between $39 and $45 million dollars for public improvements that will become public improvements once those are funded and completed. Private development is also going to be dedicating and providing 29.3 acres of land that's necessary in order to support those TIF improvements, as well as 34 acres of land necessary to support the other infrastructure improvements that the private development is going to be responsible for. And there's a map in your project analysis that details all the public TIF improvements as well as the private improvements that are going to be conducted. This is a lot of information on this map, but generally the areas in the red are what's been what has been identified as the TIF public improvements. The areas in the blue and the purple are improvements that are going to be conducted by the private developer. The tax increment area is the area that the slide that you first saw. This is just simply the site as it is today, and it represents $30 million, approximately $30 million of assessed valuation today. And so that's well below the $200 million threshold that's established by the statute. These are the TIF revenues that would be generated based on 3 different scenarios that we have identified in the project analysis: an aggressive scenario, a moderate, and a conservative. Each of those are different based on the scope of development and then the timing of development, how quickly development will occur, and what's the absorption rate, how many multifamily units can the market bring on board at any one year. And so those are different within each of those areas. And we see that under the really aggressive scenario, almost $51 million would be provided in TIF revenues that could support infrastructure investments over a 25-year period. The moderate is $42 million. The moderate scenario is the scenario that we believe is most likely to occur based on what's available information that we know about. And then we've also identified a conservative scenario of $25 million. You can see the entities that contribute those monies based on the levy amounts that get applied to the TIF, the city, county, and the port, and those are the combined totals in all those 3 jurisdictions. This is a lot more information, but if you just sort of point your attention to the top bar is the aggressive scenario, and the red is where you'd have to have some interim financing or some interim contribution of funds elsewhere until TIF revenues are generated. In other words, as the development is being stabilized or being under construction, you're going to have to make some interim financing in order to pay any debt service associated with that $39 million of infrastructure investment. And this is based on if simply you had an equal payment or equal debt service every year. You could certainly structure your debt service differently, where you'd have less debt service in the earlier years and more in the later years in order to better coincide with how revenue might come on board. The middle column is the moderate scenario. You can see we have about 7 years in which you'll have to have some interim financing to fill that gap between what the TIF revenues are generated, expected to bring in, and then what the debt service will be. And then on the conservative scenario, almost every year has some form of gap. Of course, it gets lower and lower in the later years as the development is fully built out. A lot of jobs are going to be created with the Broadmoor project. For the aggressive scenario, 6,600 jobs, and these are temporary construction-related jobs. 5,650 for the moderate, and then 1,880 for the conservative. Similarly, for the total jobs, for ongoing jobs, for the businesses and the retail that are included within the Broadmoor area, we have 1,100 jobs under the aggressive scenario, almost nearly the same for the moderate. And then on the conservative scenario, which we forecasted far less office development, is 280 jobs. There's additional revenues that come from development beyond just property taxes. Many times it's the sales taxes, the ongoing sales taxes, and other taxes. When combined, they exceed what you usually bring in for property tax, and the same is true here. And you see that we've calculated for both city and the county being another big benefactor from tax increment areas, that the city would receive, under the aggressive scenario, an additional $53 million over a 25-year period, with the bulk of that coming from ongoing sales tax. Under the moderate scenario, that drops down a little bit to $50,270,000. In the conservative scenario, $36,320,000. Again, the larger bulks of those funds coming from ongoing sales tax for the city. There's also a risk assessment and mitigation plan. This is really kind of your backup plan for how are you going to pay for the debt service associated with that $39 million if the project is not developing as it's anticipated, or if there's a stall in the economy, or whatever the issue is that's causing some sort of delay and reduce development than what was predicted. And so there are 4 levels of financial mitigation that we've identified that you could lean on if needed. One of those is just the additional taxes that I identified previously. Now, obviously, if you have less development, it means you're going to have less overall additional taxes. But there is an amount there that you could use for debt service. Certainly, some of that will go towards just your operational needs and operational staffing. But I suspect there's going to be a big bulk of that's going to be available also for any debt service if you need to use it. The next sort of level, if you look at it this way, or level of defense, would be the conservative development that we have projected. And one of the conservative development scenario is that there's be no development after 2030. And so, that's just really 5 or 6 sort of development lots. If that were to occur, that should give some level of protection that it's most likely you're going to have more revenues coming on board than what that sort of level is forecasting. Level 3 is that we've forecasted just sort of the limited taxes on commercial development. And all of these levels are detailed in the project analysis, and they identify the dollars that will likely be available that you then could use. But level 3 is this: what if you just had 2 lots, 2 of the sort of the key commercial lots that we believe will develop first? What if those are the only things that ever developed? What kind of revenue would you be bringing on an ongoing basis, as well as TIF revenues, could you use to pay for the debt service? And so that's an additional amount that you could use for the debt service. And then finally, you have city reserves. Reserves that, if they don't completely pay for the infrastructure improvements, they come very close to paying for all the associated public investments that you'd be making under TIF. So with those 4 mitigation measures, we wanted to provide you with some level of comfort that these are revenues that you could rely upon, again, if development doesn't occur as expected. There's also some private mitigation measures, too, that we would suggest implementing. One would be, and it's already included and baked in sort of our analysis, is really the conservative estimate for the multifamily development. We've used a density between 28 units and 45 units. And that's far below about half what you might receive if the developments were to be built in accordance with your code. In other words, sort of 5 stories, 6 stories. And typically, if you have underground parking or a podium with parking on that site, you're going to have 100 units per acre, generally. And so this is anticipating that maybe you'd have some surface parking that would accommodate some units, or you're just going to have fewer units, and fewer units means fewer tax dollars. And so we believe that's a mitigation factor that you can rely upon in terms of assuring yourselves that you're able to pay for the debt service. And the last is a letter of agreement. Currently, you do have a letter of agreement right now. Oh, debt issuance timing. It's noted in both categories, but you're not anticipated to issue any debt until sometime next year in spring. Doesn't mean you're not going to be not doing any work on any of the projects. In fact, you're continuing doing work on design, architectural engineering, so you can get those packages ready to submit for public bidding. But you can also time the debt based on when you see development, some milestones occurring. And so you have a little bit of time. It's not a lot, but you have a few months where you can sort of monitor the development activity to make sure that it's proceeding like you expect it to before you actually issue that debt. And the last is a letter of agreement. We already have that today with Broadmoor Properties that identifies the responsibilities for both the city as well as Broadmoor Properties and then future developers as to what infrastructure improvements that each will make. But you want to memorialize that, make that a binding agreement so that you can have just another level of certainty that everybody that's in this partnership is going to do what they say they're going to do. And so that's going to be important, and those are things that you want to work on between now and when you issue any debt. So kind of the bottom line, the Broadmoor development is not viable really without tax increment financing, at least to the extent of the density and the scope and the scale and the placemaking that's anticipated to occur on that site. It's going to promote a higher quality development. Certainly you could have some development out there without any tax increment financing, but it would look far different than what we're showing on any of the visuals or any of the multifamily or any of the commercial development. It just simply wouldn't be there. You'd probably have some single-story development, maybe you'd have some RV sales, and not to disparage those types of developments, but it would just be a different development than what you could certainly support with TIF. There's a strong nexus, we believe, between the proposed private development and the infrastructure that we have labeled as TIF infrastructure. That's infrastructure that's been strategically really located to really support the kind of product uses that we believe would be very difficult to come into that site unless you're able to provide the infrastructure beforehand. Conservative estimates, that's really kind of built in or baked into the analysis. There's no negative impacts to affordable housing, local business community, local schools, or fire service. Each taxing district is going to benefit from the tax increment area. You're not taking, because you're even under the moderate scenario, there are more tax revenues out there than what you're taking in terms of paying for the infrastructure. So where does that balance go? It goes to it gets redistributed amongst all of the taxing districts. Plus the ongoing taxes, those that collect ongoing taxes are going to benefit, such as the county and the port. There's inherent risk with any sort of tax increment financing project. You're relying upon private real estate development. Many things can happen that could stall the development or alter the course of the size and the scale of the development. We've tried to account for as much of that as you can by having this sort of backup plan and different things that you could use to try to help pay for the debt service, but it's not a guarantee. And so we try to build in as many mitigation measures as we can into that scenario. But nothing is risk-free, certainly in the real estate business. And then lastly, of all the sort of TIP projects that I've been working on and all that I envision that would likely occur, I don't think there's a better project that can demonstrate the power of tax increment financing than the Broadmoor project. Given that you have, this incredible large site, there's nothing on it, it's vacant, it's ready for development, but it needs a lot of infrastructure. You'd never get the kind of development that you're projecting without the infrastructure. And so we're really glad to be a part of this. And the last thing I want to wrap up with is just the Office of the State Treasurer's review. As the city manager indicated, the project analysis meets the requirements of the statute, RCW 39.144. They did have some recommendations, 4 recommendations that I just want to quickly highlight for you. They recommended that the city carefully monitor, of course, the risk identified and consider the following measures. One is that you discuss sort of the exposure, what exposure of risk is appropriate, and how much potential debt service cost are you willing to take on to advance the project. And I think we've already identified that in the project analysis, given the $39 million is what we believe is necessary, between 33 and 39, based on 3 different sort of sensitivity analysis of development programs. And the city should consider budgeting for and setting aside funds to cover potential tax allocation and revenue shortfalls. You already have reserves. Certainly, you can certainly rely upon those if you need to. I think their point is just to set it into a separate system. I'm not sure that's up to you to do so if you like. And the last was just to closely coordinate with Franklin County's assessor's office to make sure that the collection of the revenue is occurring in a manner in which you expect to occur based on state law. The schedule is that on October 17th, that you'll consider an ordinance adopting the tax increment area. That's your final action associated with the tax increment area. That area would go into effect on June 1 of 2023, and then you would effectively commence the revenue collection. You would actually receive any revenue, at least our projection is not till 2025, but the area would be formed in June of 2023. And with that, I'd be glad to address questions, unless the city manager wanted to make some final wrap-up comments. Okay.
Thank you for that. City Manager.
My apologies, my light was just on. I think let's just get to questions.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And question from Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Barajas, and thank you so much, Mr. Stowe, for the presentation. I had an opportunity to see you down in Vancouver, and where you're telling a lot of people who had heard a little bit less about it, because you already gave me a good education on this. So appreciate all this. With the June 1st of 2023 date there, what actions still occur between now and then? I know it's not very far away, but I know that we have a number of developers and private businesses that are really interested in getting going as soon as possible. And so I'm trying to understand, are we sitting on our hands until then, or?
Absolutely not. I didn't identify it into the schedule here, but your engineering is ongoing, and it has been for some time. And so you'll continue to design and engineer those projects to get them ready for public bid, and then award the bids once you are ready and comfortable based on the debt that's going to be issued, and then issue the debt. So those are for the tax increment area. The next steps are adopt the ordinance. You probably want to memorialize the infrastructure agreement with Broadmoor Properties. You'll do some additional design engineering. You'll issue the bids for those projects. You'll go through entitlements with developers. And then you'll issue the debt and then monitor the construction.
All right, great, appreciate that. The only other thing I was going to mention is when I read through the ordinance, I saw in a number of areas in this, in both your presentation here and some of the others, specifically calling out stormwater separately from water and sewer. And I believe this ordinance might be missing the word stormwater in it. So I would ask that we take a second look at the ordinance just to make sure that it truly does cover all the infrastructure upgrades that were planned. I would hate to pass this when it says very clearly that you can't go back and change what you want to put in there and cover in this. I'll trust that. I just want to bring that observation, and there are a couple other typos as well. So just I'd ask for a scrub of the ordinance if that would be possible.
Appreciate that.
That's all I had. Thank you very much.
Any further questions from council members? No further questions. Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
We'll get a revised ordinance. Sorry. We'll get a revised resolution for our next meeting, and it's scheduled for October 17th, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you for that. We'll move on to our next item, general fund revenue and ad valorem tax from Director Darcy.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Tonight I'm here to talk to you about our general fund revenues. The general fund, oh boy, try this again. The general fund is significant to the city in that it represents 29% of revenues and 27% of expenditures citywide. And so for that very reason, we want to address the fund and its planning with you. As you can see, general fund revenues have been increasing over the past, this chart covers from 2017 through anticipated end of 2022. A significant impact on general fund revenues has been sales tax. Construction sales tax increased 49%. So that's, and of that, one large project accounted for $1.2 million. At the same time, general fund expenses have been increasing too, approximately 10% over the same time frame. And for the sake of speed, I'm happy to stop in any slide. This kind of summarizes the different general fund sales or revenue types, but I can pass to and keep going. So if I pass them and you want me to stop, please tell me. These are the general fund taxes. As you can see that we have a couple different options of taxes, and that it is significant to the general fund's revenue. 71% of the proposed 23-24 budget for general fund revenues comes from taxes. Of that, the largest category is retail sales tax. Fees and charges account for 14%, and these are things, a couple of the categories, general government and economic environment, include fees to citizens, but then a lot of it is interfund charging for services that are provided. And then I'll move forward. Intergovernmental revenues are, by and large, state sales are shared state shared revenues, excuse me. And so those revenues go to the state and then are distributed based on different percentages and methodologies to the city itself. Doing okay still? Okay. Permits and licenses are very self-explanatory by their name. The biggest categories, building permits, and we have budgeted for economic development to continue in this next biennium, so you can see that large number of $5 million, almost $6 million. And then fines and penalties are very insignificant to the general fund revenue as a whole, 1%. Other sources are items that are kind of infrequent or vary greatly depending on plans or actions that are happening. For example, transfers in are often tied to a specific project that's being undertaken and money's moved from one fund to the next. The largest increase is seen there in other miscellaneous, and that's just us anticipating that we might sell some city assets. Next year that has happened from time to time, and just to account for that, we added it to the budget. Does not, of course, mean it will happen, but potentially. This is a summary of all the general fund revenues.
And I had a quick question here.
Yes, sir.
On a couple slides back, you talked about animal license fees. Why did they go down 43%? I mean, there's more people coming in. Wouldn't there be more animals coming in?
I think so. My understanding, and I can definitely get more information on that, is that we, in the past, we have canvassed for animal licensing, and now it is just being left more to people doing it on their own, and so there's some decrease in.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay,
but I'll double check that my understanding is correct. Is that doing okay? Oops, I think I'm turning it when I don't even mean to. So finally, or not finally, let's see here if I can go back one more page. As you can see, we have budgeted for 2023-2024 following the trend that's been existing over the last 5 years. What we did is we made that forecast, then looked at individual line items and where we knew things might deviate, adjusted there, and we come to a percentage change from 2021-2022 to this new biennium of about 11% increase. And of course, at mid-biennium, we will look at it again and make adjustments. Okay. One of the main reasons we're here looking at the general fund revenues tonight is the ad valorem tax, which is property tax. By state law, we can only increase our levy by 1% in any given year, 1% or the lesser of the IDP, whichever, the lesser. So right now, or at September 25th, the IDP was 6.457%. So we are still limited to that 1%. We do have an option to forego the 1% and not change the levy amount, but we at that same time can choose to bank it, and we have done that in the past. In 2019, we recaptured that bank capacity and used the funds for primarily the addition and relocation of fire stations. And at this point in time, our bank capacity is approximately $330,000. This is the calculation that we undertake to determine what our levy rate will be. And as you can see, there's the current tax levy, and then the two options are the same, but for the value of the 1% increase, which is $118,181. And our new construction is significant, the $496 million. And so it adds up to give us an additional $726,000 tax or levy value to tax. The end result is interesting in that because our assessed value has gone up a lot, and that has historically happened, thankfully, it has driven our rate down. So the proposed rate with no 1% increase would be 1.316 per 1,000 of assessed value. With the 1%, it's 1.328 per 1,000. And both choices result in a savings to a taxpayer in the city of Pasco, one of $54 and the other of $50. This is just a comparison across the jurisdictions that we live by, showing that Pasco's is quite a bit lower than the others. Richland is the highest. And this chart shows how we fared through the years. The rate is, as you can see, declining quickly. Well, maybe that's not quickly.
Excuse me, Director Buckley, can
17 years.
Could you go back one
Yes,
slide
sir.
there? Just want to reemphasize this. We're what? We're 2/3 of Richland and maybe 15% below Kennewick's. So we're doing a lot with way less money than Kennewick and Richland are dealing with. So I'd just like to point out that I think we're doing an exceptional job with the money that our taxpayers are providing us. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and then this is the opposite, or the part of the input that drives that rate down. So the converse to the rate going down is the assessed value going up. So you can see how much it's drastically improved over the last many years. Finally, I'll look at my notes for this one. We do have some challenges ahead of us. We are working on the new biennium's budget. A couple of those challenges are related to employment. We have many, staff and labor costs and capital costs are the highest costs that the city has. And we are looking always to, we struggled over the last recently, to hire staff and attract new employees. And so another thing that has caused, so what that causes in dollars is sometimes we may have to offer a higher wage. Also, what we have encountered is with the paid family medical leave, we have the opportunity for employees to take more extended leave. And that is resulting in the need to either pay overtime to fill the workload, or maybe we're discussing the need in some cases to have a little bit larger staff so that while there's someone there to provide the service at all times. Another challenge is one-time revenues. The sales tax is definitely, we've had a couple that are very large, and construction is that category that's making a huge difference to our benefit. But my concern is, or a concern is, that one-time revenues don't supplant ongoing or take the place of support for ongoing expenses. So that's one consideration that we're looking at, of how best to manage that one-time revenue factor. I know that you all recently approved the capital improvement plan and have looked at those projects, and we have a lot of big value and impactful projects planned for our community. So those are considerations in our revenue planning. And then finally, just city expenses in general. Like we've all experienced, inflation has increased the cost of many things, and that is true for the city as well. So we're trying to plan how best to meet those needs and serve our community. For that reason, I proposed that we take the 1%. It is not a significant amount of money to the city necessarily. It's the value is $118,000. So that certainly is not going to make a big difference. My biggest concern moving forward in planning is that with the variability of revenue that is one time, or the opportunity for growth to slow or sales tax to decrease, since it is representing such a large amount of our budget, at some point in time, we may find a gap between funding ongoing revenues if we're using a revenue source that decreases substantially. And I'll close.
Yeah, I would just note on, in addition to that, those factors that we are seeing, because of the huge amount of increase we've had in assessed valuation, particularly this last year, even taking the 1%, folks are still going to see a pretty significant decrease in their, particularly our residential properties, a pretty significant decrease in the city share of the tax in their annual tax bill. And so I think we're looking at a difference of 50 cents a month, was it, over the course of a year?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's, most folks are going to see either a $50 or as much, the difference is $50 or $54 for basically the entire year of a reduction from this year. I mean, and that's because of that assessed valuation that we saw, that industrial and assessed valuation goes into the denominator, and the total tax increase that we can take is at 1%. So we can raise our tax intake by 1%, 101%. The denominator increased by about 17% or so. So it is kind of really truly a unique situation. You don't really see that a lot. We haven't seen it here, and even with all the growth we've had, we've not seen anything quite that dramatic.
Thank you for sharing that.
Just available for any questions if you have any.
Questions from Deputy Mayor Maloney.
Thank you. I want to emphasize that point, Mr. Zabel, that you just made. People, we have a lot of kids in this city. In our school district, if you ask them anytime we do a development, they say, please don't, because we can't afford the schools, we can't afford the teachers. This industrial and commercial growth that we're having, yes, brings some new families to town, but proportionately it brings even more property tax value and property taxes that fund education and infrastructure and the functioning of the government. So if anyone wonders why we're so focused and so excited when we see, a $500 million new plant coming to town, well, it's because it helps every single thing we do as a community, every single taxing district. It helps provide the services we need. It takes that burden off the individual like homeowners. So I just wanted to doubly emphasize that, Mr. Zabel. I really appreciate you bringing that up. I'll ask a question and I'll give some thoughts. So my question is, has the risk to being able to bank the capacity changed since over the last couple of years?
The risk?
The risk of being able to, I know that's listed as a concern that we may not be able to take it in the future because of various record keeping, I guess.
I think that was at one point in time, we did have to go back and do some research and kind of prove what our banked capacity was. So, and there is not a real mechanism, like we don't get a report that shows that, and it is outside of our hands. We don't calculate that, but we can confer and check up with the county routinely to make sure after each taxing season that it is what we expect it to be. And I think that's our best safeguard, is just to be diligent and communicate well with them as well.
I recall in 2019 there was some significant effort made by the finance department to be able to get that banked capacity that we've been making for what, almost 2 decades or something like that,
A long time.
and in place so that we could afford the fire station. So so I know that was a pretty monumental effort. I have full faith that our record keeping and abilities are solid now in a way that, you know, over that period of time maybe it was more of a struggle. So what I'm hearing from you is that the risk of not being able to hasn't changed. There is a risk, but it hasn't necessarily changed over time.
No, it hasn't. And I don't recall the actual reasons why that occurred, but if I remember correctly, it wasn't even an error. It was just an inadvertent error. So if we just check on it and make sure it's, you know, where we expect it to be, well, we should be in good standing.
Right. So I guess I have two things that really come to mind on this. One, if I believe that if we choose not to bank the capacity, we should probably grab the last 2 years as well, because the biggest risk to banking capacity and losing that is simply being inconsistent on our method. So if we choose to take the 1% this year, I would recommend that we take the other 2 as well, and I'd want to see what the financials look like for that and how that would impact the taxpayers. I think if we on again off again is a huge risk for our continuity and for the county. But of course, with how high the inflation is, I'm also worried about, you know, taking the increase in the property taxes, and so I think that's that big balance here, right? We're suffering from as much or more inflation than the community at large, and we need to be able to fund that. Luckily, we are seeing significant growth in our sales tax and are able to carry us forward right now. But between this and the next item on our agenda, where we're talking about ambulance utility rates, I'm concerned about putting additional burden or less reduction on our taxpayers at this time. So what I think I heard was that we have a lot of needs. I know personally as a council member, I have things that I want to see additional money spent and staff hired, and we have to be as a council willing to pay for the things. That means we need to be able to have the revenues to pay for the things we need. So my instinct is to bank the capacity if we don't need the money, but I'm really concerned about the budget implications, just simply because our trend, the inflation right now is trending us in a really bad way. So I don't know. I guess I'm undecided on where I'm at in that, and so my apologies. But I'd love to see the comparison of capturing that bank capacity that we had as part of that conversation, so we don't lose that opportunity for the future. Sorry for that. It wasn't more definitive statement than as much as I like to. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any further comments? Councilman Milne.
Yeah, thank you, Director Buckley. I had a kind of going off what Councilman Maloney was talking about. When we talked about our previous councils, you know, for whether it's 15 or 20 years where they didn't raise the property taxes, but at the same time the city was growing, and I know we talked about 11%, you know, more funds this year, which is a great thing to have. Were the funds like more than 11% back then? I mean, why were they not raising? I mean, I know there's inflation now, which is a little bit different than back then. I mean, are we talking like there's different? I mean, I know there's also building projects, all that, but they were obviously not raising the taxes, and then now we're being asked to basically, we raised it in 2019, and then now we're talking 3 years later, we're talking about raising it again.
Right.
It just seems kind of hard to go back to people and say, well, inflation, we're raising more money than we ever had before. What do you think is the reason why? I mean, I did hear a lot of the numbers. I wasn't paying attention, but I'm saying, to me, why did the previous council, do you have any idea where, like, you see where logic comes?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I without going back and looking at past financial records, it's hard for me to answer that very in an educated manner. So I'm not entirely sure what the choices were, and what the factors have been, but I can try to do some research and look.
I will just note, I put that slide up there and you can see, back to 2008 and through 2016 or so, or at least 15, where it's pretty flat, which indicates not a lot of growth in the denominator. So we were getting a lot of residential development at that point in time, which certainly has benefits, adds population, also adds demands, and the council was banking at that point in time, but you were not getting the kind of industrial development, or you'd see that rapid decline in levy rate. And so you see that whole flat era for almost a little bit more than a decade out there. So that partially answers your question, I think, yeah.
I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Councilmember Brown.
Quick question, I just want to confirm. What I'm hearing is that consistency is one of the major concerns. So if whatever that consistency is, the goal is to safely continue with that so that there's not any, my terminology is going to be, Ferguson, you got me? Okay. Any legal oops that might come up, right? So that's what will be brought back to us, I'm understanding, so that we can really understand how to pocket.
About the rate in
Yes.
banking, yes,
Okay.
that's what the concern is, that sometimes if we don't take the bank capacity that we've built up, when we decide to increase the rate, we're not being consistent, and so it can maybe cause some confusion.
Okay, thank you.
No further questions. Thank you so much,
you.
Director Buckley, for your presentation. Before I move on to our next item on the agenda, we do want to take a 5-minute break, so to return at 8:57. Okay, so we'll take a quick break. Thank you. All right, it's 8:58. We're back in session. Our next item on the agenda is item C, ambulance utility rate study. And again, we have Finance Director Darcy Buckley.
Good evening again. Tonight we have our rate study to look at, and Martin Chaw of FCS is online. So, can you hear us, Martin?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me,
good.
Darcy?
Yes, we can hear you well. Thank you very much. We're glad to have you here to
All right.
present your findings, and I'll let you take over.
Oh, great. Awesome. Thank you very much. Council members, thank you for having me. For the record, Martin Chaw, Project Manager with FCS Group. I'm pleased to have you have this presentation tonight for you. In the interest of time and the late hour, we'll go through this pretty quickly. Next slide, Darcy. So in terms of the scope of work, our firm was asked to update the previous ambulance utility rate study that FCS Group prepared for you. This was back in 2019, as you may recall. As part of this study, we were asked to determine the cost of service for operating the ambulance utility as it stands today, plus the opening up of a new station number 85, which is anticipated to open in 2023. We were also asked to determine rates for opening future station numbers 87 and 86, and I'll show you what those may look like. And then second is to develop a proposed rate for non-emergency lifts, and I'll go over what that is and what the proposed rate is for that. Next slide, Darcy. The city staff report does an excellent job of overviewing the state law governing creation of an ambulance utility. So I won't go over details on this, but in essence, an ambulance utility is authorized under RCW 3521-766. In order to establish a rate for an ambulance utility, a cost of service study is required, and as part of the cost of service, determination of the demand cost as well as the availability cost is required. And again, staff's report on this was excellent and does a great job of describing the components of the ambulance rate and the requirements of that. Next slide, Darcy. As you know, fire services in Pasco is currently provided by 4 stations. Stations numbers 81, 82, 83, and 84. And then station number 85, as I mentioned, will be opening in 2023. And as you can see on the western side of the city there. Next slide. In terms of fire services are funded within the city by 3 general mechanisms. One is fire impact fees, and impact fees are assessed on new development. And generally, those fees are used to finance construction-related activities. In this case, specifically fire stations and apparatus. And those fees are collected over time as development occurs. FCS is under contract to prepare a fire impact fee update for the city. And we're currently working on that. Fire services are also funded by ambulance utility rates, as you can see, and as well as by a general fund. And about 80% of your fire services is being funded through rates, and about 20% is funded through your general taxes. Next slide, Darcy. In terms of future fire stations, stations 87 and 86. For this analysis, we developed rates with the assumption that those stations would open in 2025 and 2026, respectively. Now, that was just for forecasting purposes. The actual date in which those stations would open would, of course, depend upon future growth. But we needed to use a target date to open in order to develop the proposed rates for the city. Next slide, Darcy. In terms of fire department funding, and your overall fire department business is worth about $20 million a year. As you can see on the slide, about 60% of that is funded through the ambulance utility rates, and that grows over time as with the cost of operations, and then the portion for the general fund, as you can see, makes up the rest, and that is forecast to grow over time as well. And this is for current levels of service plus station 85 only. Next slide, Darcy. In terms of the ambulance utility sources of funding, and again, we have the full deck as part of your packet. And what I'm presenting and going through here with your council are excerpts from that. Within the ambulance utility sources of funding, as you can see, the utility is funded, or rates will raise about $7 million a year starting in 2023, and that increases over time as cost of operations increase. And then there's a small portion, and that's approximately equal to that 20% that I mentioned earlier, which is coming from the city's general fund. The difference between this slide and the previous one is represented by non-city revenues, and that includes things such as transport payments, state GEMT revenues, etc. We don't show that here on this slide for simplicity, but this focuses just on the rate revenues and the city general fund revenues. Next slide, Darcy. Thank you. So this slide has a lot of information on it, but let me walk you through each one in a little bit more detail. So let's start off with the darker gray segment on the lowest portion of this stacked bar. This represents the forecasted sources of funding or the costs for the ambulance utility. Again, it starts off at about 6.9 million, increases to about 9.6 million over the next 5 years. And then there's the general fund portion that's represented in that white in that white portion there, starting about 1.4 million and then gradually increasing to about $2 million by the year 2027. What we notice is there's two different segments introduced, a darker gray segment and then a slightly lighter gray segment. The darker gray segment represents the opening of Station 87. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we had to pick a date for the opening of stations 87 and 86 for modeling purposes. But of course, the actual date in which those actually occur would depend upon future growth and, of course, action by the City Council. So in terms of the incremental cost of that new station to operate, for Station 87, as you can see, that it starts off at about 1.1 million in 2024, is increasing to about 1.2 million by about 2027. And then for Station 86, that starts at about 1.5 million in the year 2025, increasing to about 1.6 million in 2027. If some of you may have caught on that the rates for stations 87 and 86 begins 1 year sooner than that one graphic that I showed where Station 87 is forecasted based on our analysis to open in 2025 and then Station 86 1 year later. So you may be asking, okay, so wait a minute, how come the rates or the impact here is shown 1 year prior? And that's because of the initial startup costs, and that includes acquiring the necessary apparatus and hiring the new staff through the academy, getting them set up so that when the stations do come online, that it is all set to go. Next slide, Darcy. So this is a view of the forecasted rates for your ambulance utility through the year 2027, starting off with that grayish bar on the far left. Your current rate is $16.20. Our forecast is that in order to fund current levels of services plus Station 85, the rate would need to be $16.66 starting in 2023, increasing to about $21.22 in the year 2027. There is a white segment. It shows $1.37 in 2023, $1.49 in 2024, and 94 cents in 2025. What that represents is a phase-in strategy. We work with staff on this. We anticipate, and as you know, the city was awarded a grant, a 3-year SAFER grant for new staff for Station 85. So what we did as part of the forecast is assume that the SAFER grant would be available to fund those new employees for Station 85 starting in 2023, and then we would slowly wean the city off of that grant. Again, it's a 3-year grant. We expect that grant to expire at the end of 2025, and the city would need to be able to stand on its own starting in 2026 for those new staff. So that white segment that you see, $1.37 in 2023, $1.49 and 94 cents, that represents the portion of rates that we're avoiding because we're using grant funding during those 3 years. In terms of the rate impact for stations 87 and 86, as you can see for Station 87, that starts off at about $2.75 in 2024, gradually increasing to about $2.72 in the year 2027. You see there's a slight dip between 24 and 25, and the reason for that is, again, because of the one-time costs that I mentioned of acquiring apparatus to operate Station 87. So once those purchases are made, of course, that cost goes away, and there's a slight savings that we can realize as part of the rate itself. Same thing for Station 86, starting in 2025. at $3.50, decreasing to $3.40 in 2026, and then gradually increasing to about $3.45 in 2027. So when we add up all the segments that are in color there, with the exception of the phase-in rates, your proposed or the forecasted rates here is a 1666 in 2023, 2017, in 2024, with the opening of, for example, Station 87, increasing to 2473 in 2025, with the opening of Station 86, and then levelizing to 2637 in 26 and 2739 in 2027. Next slide, Darcy. In terms of comparison with other jurisdictions, again, Pasco's current rate is $16.20 as represented in the far right column there. Kennewick also operates an ambulance utility. The rate is $14.12 in Richland, as well at $10 per month. In terms of levy collection, this is from the property taxes. The city collects about $11.8 million, compared to Kennewick at $14.4 million and about $19 million for the city of Richland. In terms of population, you see the population differences there at 77,000 for Pasco, almost 90,000 for Kennewick, and then 60,000 for the city of Richland. I won't go over the other statistics with you, but the point here is to show and compare and contrast statistics between the three cities, including the area covered, as you can see, number of square miles covered, calls for service, ambulance calls for service, on the third line from the bottom there, the number of calls per station on average, and the density, or the number of people per square mile. Next slide, Darcy. So let's shift our attention to non-emergency lifts. What this is when a resident or a resident at a nursing home, if they fall and they're unable to get back up, they may call the city's fire department and ask or call 911, and a team from your fire department is dispatched to help that person get back up and ensure that they're okay, or unless they need transport to a local healthcare provider. Between 2019 and 2021, you see the number of non-emergency lift incidents that the city responded to, about 200 incidents in 2019, increasing to about 280 incidents in 2020, and we saw about 250 incidents in 2021. In terms of the number of incidents per 1,000 population throughout the city, that's about 2.7 incidents per 1,000 population in 19, 3.7 in 2020, and about 3.2 in 2021. And that last row there shows the percent change in terms of the number of incidents per 1,000 population. Large increase in 2020, and then a decrease in 2021. Currently, the city does not assess a fee for non-emergency lifts. In order to cover the city's costs, there is a recommendation to establish a non-emergency lift fee. I think that is outlined in the presentation for you at about $1,000 per lift, and that reflects the cost of 3 staff to go out and about 2 hours to respond to that. And that's comparable to a non-emergency lift fee, excuse me, that the city of Tacoma is charging for similar services. Next slide, Darcy. So in terms of conclusions and next steps, for current ambulance utility operations, including Station 85, our proposal is to increase rates from $16.20 to about $16.66 in 2023 to fund those services. And then in terms of next steps for Stations 86 and 87, once the city is ready to open those stations, there should be some discussion about the timing of those stations to address growth, and when the city may want to pull the trigger and fund and open those stations and increase ambulance utility rates to support those two new stations. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Again, I tried to go through that somewhat quickly, but again, staff's report on the ambulance utility rate did a great job of overviewing the issues and options for council, and a complete copy of this presentation is available in your packets as well.
Thank you for your
I'll stop
presentation.
there and see if you have any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. So I'll turn over to council members if you have any questions, any feedback. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Barajas, and thank you so much for the presentation. I appreciated the detailed look at how our funding profile is going to have to change over time as we bring the new stations online. I would note that compared to our currently compared to Kennewick and Richland on that slide 17 there, we have one less station than either of them, but we have in the works 3 more. So it sounds like we'll be above them in terms of comparables, and frankly, I think I'm well convinced that that is a worthwhile investment to keep our community safe, especially as we're going to continue to grow during that time. So it's not a challenge; it's simply a recognition that in something that doesn't happen very often, we will have some specific, measurable community services that are significantly better than our peer communities across the river. So that's something I'll be honest, I'm proud of. Okay, so I have a couple questions. One's for actually for Director Buckley. Every month we write off an amount of ambulance fees. Those are specifically because of a cap for Medicare. Do I have that correct? So there's a portion that we can't recover because
It's a combination of allowances that are related to their discounts more than write-offs, allowances related to private insurance or medical insurance through the Medicaid.
So if we were to increase our transport rates, which is one of the asks of us, we would see that number likely go up significantly. But what I think I understood from this presentation as well is that private insurance would cover more if we were charging more. Certain insurances we're still going to negotiate with, and then certain like Medicare or other low-income services, we're not going to be actually charging them any more effectively because of that kind of cap that's in place.
We charge Medicaid now based on that GEMT rate, so they're kind of in a separate cost pool or rate collection than other people that use the ambulance and have a transport. So there's different billing cycles for those different types of customers.
Okay, I appreciate that. Where I was trying to get at was this isn't going to disproportionately affect our lowest income residents, and I'm hearing no, it will absolutely not. Thank you. Regarding the lift assist fees or penalties, depending on how you looked at that, I noted that it was only written for businesses, for residence programs. Is that how they'll be implemented? I mean, to be specific, my father hasn't been needing those services because there is no one in the house that could lift him at the time, and he went after he fell. So
it really it's to deter large assisted living facilities, which we don't currently have any. And when you look at the slide that shows calls and calls per thousand, you see that we're way below we're not way, but we're below Kennewick and Richland, and that's because they have many assisted living facilities that do that call them, even though technically they're not supposed to. And when we've discussed this, it's the belief that we should not be charging that resident. We should be charging the facility that's collecting a large amount of money per month to take care of those people and doesn't have enough staff on duty at 2 a.m. to lift somebody back into bed. So that's where we're kind of going with that. And as council knows, we're poised to get our first large facility in the Burns Road area, and we think it's important to consider this prior to that facility going into place so that we have it in play. Right now, we only have 2 small facilities that we take care of. And we get some lift assist calls there, but they're not very many. But this facility coming in has more people combined than those two current facilities. And statistically, we'll see 2 calls per year per bed in one of those facilities.
Great, I appreciate that. And last, I noted that we have the SAFER grant that we just were approved for and accepted. But that's for Station 85. Do we have a similar opportunity for Stations 86 and 87? Or I'm seeing
Yes,
nods.
there is no limit to how many times we can apply for SAFER, but whether we get it or not. It was kind of interesting this year. There was only 6 total SAFER grants awarded in Washington and only 3 for hiring. So we were fortunate to get one of those this year.
Well, I'll chalk that up to the quality of our staff. So I guess when I'm looking at this, I understand that the need to increase these rates. I know that costs are going up, especially in this field. That's been true for a long time. The GEMT has helped stabilize this fund, because I think we were looking at a projection of double-digit increases, either significant increase in contribution from the general fund or massive rate increases annually. So glad to see that we've got some stability there. Understand the need for increases and appreciate that some of the big percentage increases are not going to affect our most vulnerable. So I think all said and done, I appreciate that. I understand the material in front of us and look forward to this being presented. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any further questions? Councilmember Milne.
Thank you. I know in past years when we've talked about the rate increases, I know we changed it a little bit up as far as what a resident pays and a business pays. And I know in the past conversations, they were saying certain businesses were actually causing a lot more of the services, whether it be a Walmart or some of the other ones. But what I wasn't sure on was, since I really don't see it talked about in this report, was say if a small business in downtown Pasco, what's the rate that they're paying versus say like a Walmart, Home Depot, or Lowe's in our city. I just don't see it, and I do forget things. But don't they pay extremely a lot more? I mean, is it based on employees at the business? Is that correct?
It is. It's based on an equivalent residential unit rate, and so if there's so many equivalent residential units made by a factor of employees, it's more for each equivalent residential unit. So the rate just multiplies by that, as with the number of employees at the business.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. I just wanted to clarify that. And then the last thing with taking out the Thunderbird, I mean, I know we've talked about reduced in services. What kind of, do we have an idea of, I mean, I know we still need ambulance fees and we need to increase, but is there been a substantial savings by having that facility gone? I mean, I know it's gone down, but do we know how much of a savings we've saved?
I think it's too early to really statistically quantify that because it's only been, 6 months at the most, or it hasn't been that long since it wasn't occupied. So, it's certainly something we'll look at down the road, but there certainly was calls there that we aren't going to now, but it wasn't one of our highest call facilities.
Okay. I would just add too that, one of the charts that the consultant went through, utilization is way up, and it's incidents per thousand, and just a reminder, 4.6% in 2000 and 15% in 2021. Now, some of that might have been COVID related, but those are pretty stiff increases, and I think we're continuing to see those into 2022. While as a site-specific place, obviously downtown maybe we're seeing a little bit less, but across the city, 4% or 4.5% and 15%. Those are pretty significant increases that kind of dwarf the savings we might get off a high user like the former Thunderbird Hotel.
Well, it seems like there's no further questions, so we'll move on with the agenda. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, if you could just acknowledge that Councilmember Campos joined us for the record, that'd be great.
Yes. Councilmember Campos has joined us. We're not going to put a timestamp on it, but thank you for joining us.
And he's not eligible for Girl Scout cookies because he missed that part.
Thank you again for joining us. Let's see, we'll move on to our next item, resolution, Butterfield Water Treatment Plant Facility Plan Acceptance. Director Worley is online.
Madam Mayor, good evening. John Padvaruk and I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but Corolla's here to discuss the facility plan.
Perfect,
All right, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. We'll give a brief presentation on the Butterfield facility plan. It reflects about $120 million investment over 20 years, so we'll make it relatively brief, but we'll still go over the high points for you tonight. And I have Allie Leeds here from Corollo, and she's going to go over the technical aspects of the presentation.
Great, thank you.
Is there a presentation? PowerPoint? There it is. Thank you.
Thank you. As mentioned, Allie Leeds with Corollo Engineers. We're partnered with JUB on the Butterfield Water Treatment Plant Facility Plan.
There you go.
So just in this part, we wanted to emphasize that there was a structured process that we went through to make sure we were systematically looking at pieces and considering where the treatment plant needed to go. In thinking about the treatment plant itself, this image in the lower right corner is the Butterfield Water Treatment Plant. So in Pasco, this is the largest source of water for the city of Pasco. It's about 30 MGD of treatment, so significant portion. And that lower left image on there shows there's kind of three separate components to it. There's the main treatment plant itself, some lagoons associated with it, and then the intake on the Columbia River. One of the key parts in thinking about the water treatment plant and deciding where we were going with it was thinking about the performance requirements for the treatment plant. So what do we need it to do? And so, for example, we worked through your staff with this, the top couple on there, the infrastructure portions of it, we looked at it and said, okay, we want the treatment plant following a major or even minor seismic event to follow Washington state guidelines within 1 year to be able to produce potable water at a minimum viable rate. So, some goals for where we want to get to in the future, but noting that right now your existing facility isn't able to do that. So, some goals of where we want to get to. And in thinking about the treatment plant, then one of the other big parts to it is there's a lot of infrastructure out there. And so really we want to find the best value in that and figuring out how do we combine the existing with some new infrastructure and really make sure we're utilizing all of that. So what I put on here is a timeline of major projects that have been done at the Butterfield Water Treatment Plant. And so what you've got on there, those are years that projects have been performed in. There's a table in the facility plan, if you look through it, that lists the projects. But when we're saying major, these are projects that have a drawing set associated with them. So there had to be engineering, there was a drawing set generated. So this doesn't cover the more minor stuff, replacement that your water treatment plant staff do routinely. And really what you can see on key, or what really stands out, you can see the initial build of the treatment plant way back at the beginning, and that's the kind of purple-blue portion on the left in the picture. In 1958, they doubled the size of the treatment plant, so they built the green portion of it. And then they rode through a number of years, didn't do any projects when the treatment plant was new, a major overhaul in 1985. And then as we get into later years and as the treatment plant ages, you can see the number of projects that have happened in that time have increased substantially. And so I understand you've seen the check engine light before in other projects, but really when we're thinking about infrastructure, how much do you keep investing and keeping something going along? And you really look at how much work you're doing on something and how much benefit you're getting out of it. And so you can see definitely a lot more going on in the end and not additional capacity or processes happening. So in thinking about where do you go then with this, a few options are out there. I think, well, we can put a bunch more money into that existing facility and see what we can get out of it. And we already talked about how it doesn't meet that seismic goal, and we can try and do what we can to improve that, but it's never going to be a brand new facility again and meet all those goals. We could look at the potential of building a whole new treatment plant on a new piece of land. And so that's an option that means you need to go find land. And these treatment plants are really tied to their intake, to that Columbia River intake point. And so it's pretty selective on where you can put that plant, and there just isn't a lot of land that's readily available for something like that. And so then the other portion is we look and say there's some space around that treatment plant, so what can we do with that? And so this is where we roughly ended up in discussing with staff on where to go. So this is a phased replacement of the treatment plant. So what you essentially see, and these are some different steps in it that happen over time, but the existing water treatment plant is that middle portion right now. And what you see happening in the different colors are different phases of infrastructure being built. And some of the infrastructure then allows you to take out other portions as you walk along. And so there's a bunch of details in there, and I'm happy to answer questions, but you can see ultimately we build out and the entire old core of the plant disappears off the site and new infrastructure gets installed and it's at the same site. So in thinking about cost for that, we've laid out a 20-year capital improvement plan. So all those pieces happen at different points in time, a few projects at a time. We've got a short-term, a mid-term, and long-term set of improvements. On that short-term, down at the bottom, you can see this is roughly the next 5 years. It's got about a $5 million annual cost in 2021 dollars. And so those costs are costs that are already planned for in your rate study, your current rate study, and accommodated by that. Moving into midterm and long-term, we've increased the spend in those years. So the annual costs going into the more long-term stages are about $10 million a year, 2021 dollars. And so those would be studies you'd be looking at under a future rate study or spend under a future rate study. So really what we're able to do in looking at this is accommodate the needed improvements at current rates and then phase to avoid stranding your assets that are at that existing water treatment plant. And then ultimately prioritizing some high-risk, big impact projects. So if we're talking about what those projects are, right out of the gate, our highest risk, biggest impact projects, a few key new infrastructure projects that are on here for these next 5 years are an electrical building and a chemical building. And these are really about helping create infrastructure that meets current code. That chemical building allows us to move the new chemicals, put in new chemicals, remove the chlorine gas from your existing water treatment plant, replace it with sodium hypochlorite generation in the new chemical building. And then we also do some improvement to the existing treatment plant just because there's some infrastructure that isn't going to make it 10 years. So ultimately, laying it out, you can see these are coming up, projects in the near term. So right out the gate, already funded, 2023. Ultimately, you saw this phase, but a picture of where we're going on site. So with that, I'd take any questions or comments, and a special thanks to the city staff. I don't know if you saw the facility report, lots of pages and analysis, and then they've been all through it at least once, maybe multiple times.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for a brief presentation. Going across, do we have any questions or comments from any council members? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Barajas. Thank you for the presentation. So this plan, what I heard you say was that in the 2023 to 2026 is currently funded under our current rates within the water utility. And then are all these projects or this phasing of the projects, that is consistent with the CIP we just approved?
Yes.
I know I should be able to answer that question myself, given that I voted to approve it, but this is consistent with that.
It is, yes.
Excellent. Well, I certainly appreciate it. There's very few things that are more important than making sure that people have drinking water. I think we just found that somewhere in the South, about a month ago, that how absolutely critical it is to have access to that drinking water. And the other thing I'd note is that when I was doing some work, when I used to work at the Hanford site, one of the biggest safety risks we had out there wasn't actually radiological materials. It was that they have a water treatment plant with chlorine gas. And given how close proximity the residential is there, I certainly appreciate and understand the need for moving to a more modern way of disinfecting, and that it's much less risk to those people who are literally right across the street from this plant. So I appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Milne.
Thank you, Mayor. I know I actually work a couple blocks from the Butterfield plant there, and I've never had had a smell, but I've had other people say that there's smell. Or do you guys know anything about that, or have you heard anything about that? And with changing the new equipment, I assume there will be very little noise or any kind of odor or anything like that.
So certainly, I guess in terms of smell, I'm not sure which components to it, but a water treatment plant itself, it is producing drinking water, and under when you install, for example, generators or other components within the plant, they'll need to comply with whatever your noise ordinance is within the city for whatever area they're going in. So that would be part of the components to that.
Okay, well, that's kind of what I thought. I just wanted to clarify. So
And
thank
in
you.
big picture, we're not doing something horribly different than what's there already. So there wouldn't be a substantial shift where you would see something worse. Do you know what kind of a smell people had reported before?
I just had a couple people, like, he came in and said, hey, we smell it. But again, I never ever smelt it, not like going out to the other plants where you're like, whoa. And again, I work by there, but I've never actually, I've walked by there numerous times, but not on a daily basis. So I don't know, maybe it was just a bad day. I was just kind of curious, just because I'd heard a couple of complaints, but it was very little complaints, like 2 in the last 5 years. So
I think the filters are those larger square or rectangular areas on the plan. That's water from the river that goes through those filters. So there's a little footprint of river water in the middle of the city. So to some extent, what you smell in there is just what you would smell if you were by the river. There's not too much you can do about that.
okay, that makes sense.
Or we won't be really changing that process.
Okay.
But it looks like no further questions or comments. Thank you again for the presentation. We'll move on to our next item on the agenda, item E. Tri-Cities Animal Control and Sheltering Services update by Ms. Angela Prashon, Senior Management Analyst.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So the Tri-City Animal Control Authority, or the ACA, has been jointly operated by the 3 cities of Kennewick, Pasco, and Richland for many years through an ILA. Historically, the operations for animal control and shelter services has been done through a contractor. In November of 2021, Benton Franklin Humane Society assumed operations under an emergency agreement, and they completed their term as of July 15th of 2022. The City of Pasco issued a request for proposals for an external contractor on June 23rd with a deadline of 7/28. We extended that to August 5th, but without a third-party agency to provide service, the City of Pasco began operating animal control and the shelter services. So upon taking over operations, staff found the following deficiencies and concerns: lack of policies and standard operating procedures, no established veterinary partnership for prescribing, dosing, or medicating animals, lack of controls throughout the facility and operations, overcrowded facility with primarily unaltered animals. We approximate that we had about 350 in our care upon taking over the operation. We also had a backlog of what was called foster to adopt animals. Those animals were with their homes, but still on our books, so our responsibility for medical care and any kind of supplies until they could be altered. And then the facility and fleet was also showing years of unresolved or poor repairs. So since taking over control, staff has completed the development of standard operating procedures. We formed a relationship with an external vet partner who's helped us with the animal care policies, procedures, and operating procedures. We partnered with the ASPCA and Mikey's Chance Rescue to manage our parvo outbreak. We determined and are staying within our capacity for care at the shelter, making sure that animals are being provided the adequate care that they need, and lessening the risk of spreading disease. Since takeover and as of the 6th of October, we've done 320 adoptions. We have had 270 animals altered, and we've transferred out 133 animals to rescues, so building partnerships, making sure that we keep those strong. We also transitioned the phone system to the Ring Central system, so the one that the city uses. And within the first 2.5 weeks of that implementation, we received over 1,600 calls. So a lot of calls come in through animal shelter and animal control. A contract management structure has proven difficult over the years, and contractors coming in are focused on starting and maintaining a business, so they have to be a nonprofit in addition to providing the care, the services, and the animal control services. Additionally, we have obviously a lot of statutory requirements when it comes to records and public records, and that's been a historical struggle with our contractors. While there's still more work to be done, it's become clear that the services are better provided by a government agency. Pasco, Kennewick, and Richland leadership have discussed a city-managed operation. Staff has looked into a preliminary budget for a city operation. We believe that's going to be about $2 million a year, split evenly through with the 3 cities. If council agrees with a city managed operation, staff would work with the ACA members to approve the course of action for the ILA. And if it's agreed upon by the ACA, staff would include the necessary FTEs and budget needed in the 2023-2024 budget that's coming to you all. All staff currently are temporary, so they're kind of, under the temporary agreements. And additionally, staff recommends the hiring of an animal services manager immediately to be able to provide that focused time and attention that's needed. Doing that prior to the new year would also give them the opportunity to see how the operation is working, see any adjustments before making those determinations on staff. And is there any questions?
Very brief.
Trying to.
Presentation. Thank you. There's several questions actually. I will go down the list with first our city manager.
I just wanted to make a comment. First of all, Angela's just done a great job going in there and kind of straightening out what we found. And I think, to the recommendation of a city managed facility, I think what we've kind of seen over the years is this lack of continuity from contractor to contractor, and this slow, maybe not even slow is the right word, but this continued degradation between regarding the care of animals in our community over the past probably decade, maybe longer. And I think this is an opportunity to put that to a stop. That's 20 is what we have down there now in terms of FTE count, and that's about what it's going to take to run it with the enforcement side as well. And with that, I'll be quiet, but I wanted to just recognize Angela for the great job she's done down there as well too. So.
Thank you so much, Angela, for your presentation and for the work that you've been doing keeping up with the animal shelter. First, Mr. Councilmember Campos.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Manager's able to kind of took the words right out of my mouth. I understand that you've kind of taken on a large role down there almost very suddenly, and I just want to congratulate you on the work that you're putting into it. It's been clear that this has been a hot topic and an important subject for a lot of people in our community, and I think it's been clear from the last few contractors that we've had that sometimes people who have a huge passion for animals maybe aren't the best person to be running those businesses, right? And having the structure of a city government that kind of takes some of that passion out of that. And not to say that we as city, members don't have a passion for animals, but we work to policies and having a structure to work to, and it really helps accomplish the goals that we're trying to set out. On top of that, it sounds like you guys have kind of made a pretty good turnaround, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the facility looks like with more of that structure, and you've got my backing.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Milne and then Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so Angela Bashan, I know I've been down there with Director Zach Rutguy. We did a walkthrough a couple months ago. Huge difference. Obviously, the smell was still there, but that's the smell of the building. But overall, I was impressed on how it looked compared to when I did a previous tour last year. My other question is, so thank you for that. I did want to acknowledge that you've done a very good job on that. On another topic, we're involved with Mikey's Chance. My wife fosters dogs, so we have a fair amount of fosters right now. And then, of course, we love our dogs. But my point is, I know, of course, we follow a lot of stuff on Facebook. And so you probably know where I'm getting to at this. Like before, the animal shelter was a no-kill shelter, correct? Are we still a no-kill shelter?
So the definition of no-kill shelter is going to be variable. There's no one set definition. What is most commonly used is 10% or less of your animals are euthanized. We are still we're about 7%. So we are still within that. We make the decisions based on talking with a vet, seeing what kind of medical care is happening. We do as much as we can to do transfer to rescues. Mikey's Chance has been great. They're working with us on one with a dog that has a shattered pelvis right now. So we do our best to get them to the rescues that have the ability to provide that care.
Okay, and then I know another one. I have some of the comments that I've seen online. I just copied a couple of them. One says, one Facebook post by someone who has found a stray says the animal shelter is not taking strays and advised me to just dump her back outside. Are you familiar with this one, or?
So with our operations, what we do is we encourage, when you find an animal in a neighborhood, often those animals are going to be reconnected with their families a lot quicker by staying where they're at. So we try to educate the public to say, you know, hey, can you put them on social media? You're on the sites, you see how fast and quick things get published and put out there. Oftentimes those animals are going to be reconnected with their families within 24 to 48 hours by staying in their location. We are continuously working on our customer service and how we communicate things to those who are calling or coming in. We're still at our capacity, so we're at 200 animals right now in our care. With the staffing we have, that is above our capacity, just barely. We do work with individuals. We try our best to, if they don't want to put them on social media, we will do it for them. We ask for them to do a couple days where they try and reconnect them. If that doesn't work, we do take them as strays. But we have seen a great success with individuals actually finding those and helping connect. And what happens is people take them out of someone's yard or next to their yard, and then their owners come down and they're not only mad at us, they're mad at the people who took them. So we try to do that education piece.
Okay, I know you said you were around 200 dogs, but when you opened this, or when you took over the facility, you were at 350. Wouldn't 350 be like the max number? I mean, isn't that like half the dogs and cats that you're?
So we have on staff each day, we have 5 individuals who are dedicated to animal care. Based on the calculation, it's usually 15 minutes per animal, that's specifically dog. We can accommodate the 200. We may have space, but we don't have enough staff necessarily to care for every single one of the animals that come in the door. So that's where we work through that capacity for care and put in some measures. We work really hard to get them to, if they're too young in a foster program, that way we free up our ability. We have a lot of kittens right now, so getting them out into a foster frees up about 7 or 8 spaces or animals within our care. So we had 350. I can tell you that we had kennels that were stacked at that period of time. We do not have that right now, and we're actually able to provide the care to get them through the system much quicker because we're not overcrowded.
Okay, well that kind of leads me to my next question. I know we were talking about dealing with Mikey's chance and stuff like that, and you said you only have 5 staff members. What about volunteers? I mean, I know in the past there was quite a lot of volunteer people that were down at the shelter. Are you not getting the amount of volunteers? I know some have left. Can you kind of give us a reason? I mean, how many volunteers are you guys having now versus how many used to be there?
I don't know how many used to be there. I can say that our dog walking program is still active, and it's still every day, twice a day, we have dog walkers coming through. With every program and everything within the shelter, there were no protocols, there were no programs set up. So we've been working to get that to a point where we can get full-time our volunteers back in to the swing of things. We've had them helping with different projects here and there, but it's really been getting the staff up to a place where they're able to kind of do the entire operation. We didn't have sanitize or disinfecting protocols or procedures. That stuff takes a lot of time to train staff. So we're finally getting to that point where we can bring volunteers in who might be interested in doing those kind of things. So as we continue to develop the programs, we can definitely welcome the volunteers back in a bigger capacity.
Okay, and then I guess my other thing is, I guess I having a hard time when we say, animal control or animal, shelter. To me, that means that like, if you find a stray dog and you don't see the dog, because a lot of dogs, they freak out when the stranger comes and they'll run back to their house. But say the dog does come up to you, to me, it seems like instead of saying, oh, we're just going to leave the dog where the dog could be hit by a car or, you know, grabbed and say taken to like a little fight or something like that. I mean, you don't know. It seems to me that the definition of an animal shelter is somewhere where you take the dog for shelter. So again, I guess I'm not really, I mean, I understand your concept where you don't want to take a dog out of a yard, but I don't think most people really take dogs out. The dog could get out of the yard, but I'm just saying, I mean, I mean, I do understand where you're coming from, but on the other hand, it seems like if I found a dog, and we have found dogs, you know, we take them home, we try to, you know, put it on social media and go that route. But it just seems like if you're taking them to an animal shelter and they're telling you not to take it there, to take it back, it doesn't seem like that's the definition of an animal shelter, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, how do you, I mean, I just really not 100% understand the concept of, because if I lost my dog, the first place I would go would be social media and the animal shelter. So if the dog's in the woods and you tell them to bring the dog back to the woods, how does that?
Well, we're not, the only time we say go put the animal right back is usually the healthy cats. So that's one of the primary animals that people try to bring in. Cats are usually indoor outdoor. So we were getting a lot of very healthy looking cats and people bringing them in. It's we recommend you do put them back because they can survive outside. They're indoor outdoor. For the dogs, what we ask is that if they can provide that temporary 12 hours in a garage or in their yard, what we have had happen a lot is people come to us and they said, we canvassed our entire neighborhood. We had the entire neighborhood out there. So we're trying to do that communication where it's that back and forth. So I understand what you're saying.
Okay, so to clarify, you're saying that cats, which makes 100% sense, you're telling them bring the cat back, but a dog, you're saying you prefer that they keep the dog at their house for 12 hours, but after that, they would bring it, or a day, bring it to the shelter. That's what you're basically saying.
That's the kind of, that's the relationship we're hoping to build with the community, especially when they're in a neighborhood. If they're on Road 68 in Sandifer and running around, that's obviously that's a danger to not only the public, the animal. Those are the kind of animals we understand. Bring them in. We encourage people, you can bring them down, we can scan them. If they are microchipped, we make sure that we call the company. We have a better opportunity to get the owner information than someone else who's just calling with the chip number.
Okay, and the last question, I know we spent a lot of time on my questions, but I'd also heard that, like, say if a dog gets hurt, like the one that you're talking about, and I've seen other ones where the dogs were injured badly, isn't there a mechanism where, because I went to an event last year, I think it was on Clover Island, where it was money raising for this kind of stuff. Isn't there like a fund that the city can pull from when you have a dog that's seriously hurt, that it's not coming out of the city's budget, but it's coming out of this fund that people pay into where the dog could have the medical treatment that it needs? Is that something that you're familiar with, this program, or?
There's different nonprofits that we do try and partner with that will provide the care or the medical expenses. That's what we're trying to do right now with the husky, with the broken pelvis. We don't have a fund necessarily. We do have donations going. People are donating to the shelter through the city, but we don't have like a foundation or anything like that. So we usually work with our rescue partners to see, this is a bigger, case than we can provide care for. Is this something you would be interested in transferring to you? Because they do the fundraising and the grants and have that ability.
Okay, I guess my point was I'd just rather see if we could work with these organizations to take care of the dog, get the dog treatment. I realize the city can't pay for everything, but on the same hand, I'd hate to see the dog die because the city isn't willing to pay for an operation, whether it be, these kind of dogs. You see stories, and I read them on Facebook, and I get a lot of them. And so then to hear that, oh, well, the dog might be put to death because the city isn't going to pay for it, that's kind of what I was bringing up on this. So, but yes, hopefully it keeps getting better.
Councilmember Brown.
Hi. I'm going to be so nice. Just a couple things. We've really identified three things. Identified the staff needs, whether they're full-time or part-time. policies, and then procedures. And I think those three things will cover and address everything that Councilmember Melanie brought up. Where are we at with that? Because I'm seeing a large urgency on staffing, which can answer phone calls, which can go out to these calls that's being mentioned. Someone can also address the Facebook issues that come up, and someone can respond to those. I think communication is very important, and I think this is an urgent matter. So with those three, identifying staff, whether it's full-time, part-time, who pays for it, we'll figure that out. Policies and procedures. How is all those three things coming together? And it should be simultaneously. How's that going?
It's going well. So the 20 FTEs, that is based on our experience down there. That is, as it was talked about earlier, we've got a lot of leaves that would apply if these were full-time staff. So having 5 on in our kennel staff, you have to give some people days off, I guess. That's what I'm told by HR, but
That
so
would be correct.
yes. Oh, right. Yes, of course. So trying to give them their 2 days off and not have them overworked. That's where the 8 comes into play for kennel staff. Front desk, that's going to be your phones as well as adoptions, stray intakes, all of the processing. That's about 3 staff. You've got your medical team. So we do have a breakdown, and I can get that to you all. I don't want to misquote myself because I have it written down, but we have looked at what the impact is on, there's a lot of invoicing that comes through, so there's a lot of financial processing that happens, so making sure that that's built into the structure so it's not taxing the current staff as well as your ACOs, your animal control officers, making sure that that is a proactive service. So that's staffing those positions up as well.
So I would just let you off the hook with that. One, I'm going to tell you, awesome job. You jumped in, you did it. You're going to get criticized for it. It happens, but I applaud you. I think you're doing a good job. You presented well tonight. If there's any assistance needed with that, I think those 3 areas will probably help you a lot. If you identify what you need right now, like tomorrow morning, whatever those recommendations are, let's hear them and see how we can support and getting it done sooner so that an accident doesn't happen with a dog or what have you. No, I applaud you. I think you guys are doing an excellent job by taking it. So anything we can do to support, please get it as soon as possible.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Barajas. And thank you, Ms. Michon, for the presentation. I very much want to echo what I'm hearing from council, which is thank you so much for how much hard work you put into this. With the complaints we were hearing and the devastating comments and pictures and reports we were hearing out of how things had been going, I'm not hearing those same things anymore. I'm hearing a lot of concerns, and those are good because now we have a focal point for hearing those concerns. The transparency is going to be there. That this is to me the right approach. It's more expensive. This is over twice the Neil's Nation contract. I pulled that up. That was not to exceed $875,000 per year. So when we're looking at this, we're paying double what we paid one of the contractors recently than what was approved in December of 2020. So that's one of those things where I'm not criticizing the cost. I'm acknowledging that what we're getting here is a more quality service that is more responsive, more transparent, and will hopefully be when we have members of the community who are concerned. Councilmember Milne shared a lot of those concerns that we're all seeing and we're all hearing, and now we have a focal point to address it. And if they're not happy with your answer, they're going to talk to the city manager. If they're not happy with the city manager's answer, they're going to come here and talk to us. And we now have that conduit in a way that was very difficult for us to have a lot of control over with the separate contractors. So I think this is the right direction we're going. We'll get a more premium product out of that, and I fully believe that. So I acknowledge there's more work to do, and there's more transparency and more things we need to pull together and answers we need to have on a regular basis. But now we get to have those conversations differently than we were able to in the past. My one comment for staff would be we have a board that oversees this. I think that is made up of staff members, but no elected positions. with this level of, with us changing the entire model, I would like to suggest that we consider whether or not having that added to our list of boards and commissions and seeing if that structure still makes sense as it has been before. We're all hearing so much over the last couple of years about this, and I'd like to propose at least that we need to take a little bit of that face away from the staff and put it back on council for something that's so high visibility. So that's a suggestion or a comment that I'd like to bring forward. Thank you.
Just before you go, City Manager, quick question from Councilmember Campos.
Yeah, not so much a question, just more an observation again, and just recap the last few conversations we'd heard from the community was that the predominant concern was that they were unsatisfied with the care that we're receiving for the animals. And Ms. Pashan, if I understand right, what you're saying is you've reduced the amount of animals you're intaking in order to provide and give that care that the community is asking for. And with that said, I think one thing that we haven't touched on yet is the last few contractors, from what I understand, the problem is the relationships that they had with other nonprofits or even getting veterinary care. Those relationships quickly soured and they weren't able to then provide more adequate care. And now it sounds like we have people who are willing to partner with us, and that speaks volumes to the work that we're doing. Obviously, there's some additional concerns, but I think going back to Councilmember Brown's point, your policies and procedures are going to handle a lot of stuff, and the policies and procedures I feel like should be designed in a way that it's going to be easy to just hand a volunteer. Here's how you're going to get this done, and then that you don't have to worry about taking up additional staff time to pull away somebody to train a volunteer on. It's just cookie cutter. This is how we do it. Here you go. Anybody can do it in the city, whether you're a young adult or grown up. So it's just something I don't think we touched on. Again, I think you're doing a great job, Angela, and keep it up.
City Manager.
Just a couple of comments. So I think getting to this evening obviously took us a few months, and we learned a lot along the way. As Angela mentioned, the agenda report, clearly more work to do. And one of the things we want to do is start to get that staff even more professional. I think Angela's brought it a long way, but a professional shelter manager that does this kind of thing for a living and is trained to do it, I think is going to be a plus. As great a job as Angela's doing, I don't think she imagined in last March that she'd be talking to you about having had 3 or 4 months worth of experience now running a shelter. But I think I appreciate the council's support of that direction, and we'll move forward with that. You'll probably see something in December for a supplemental budget to reflect what's already occurred, and then of course in your 2023-2024 biennial budget. ACA does have a meeting this week, and so we'll be meeting with the ACA Animal Control Authority Board and moving forward with that process as well. We have had approval from the 2 city managers, but we need to formalize that with their designees on the ACA board. And then, to Mayor Pro Tem's comment about a council board, reserving whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. It's the ILA. The ILA actually designates the ACA board as the 3 city managers or their designee. So we would have to modify that interlocal agreement. But I will note that given all that's occurred, we're probably going to see some modifications to that anyway, because we know a lot more today than we knew or could have known through our contract providers back in 2016 when that agreement was modified. So we're probably going to be sitting down, modifying some of that anyway, so we can have that discussion. Others can have that discussion some point in time next year. But and then I did want to mention too, one of the more recent contractors, the Benton Franklin Humane Society. I wouldn't want to see them get lumped into what's happened. They did a great job in coming in and trying to pull together a decent program out of what was left by the prior contractor and their abrupt ejection, basically, from the facility. So I want to make sure the council and the public understands the city, is grateful for what Ben Franklin Humane Society did to help us get to here. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comments, City Manager, and you're right. There's a lot of work that's been put in from previous organizations and a lot of work that you've done yourself and staff with you. However, I do have some questions before I pass it over, and just really to touch over on some of the comments made by Councilmember Milne. You spoke a little about not taking volunteers or not having volunteers available. I do have comments from volunteers, people in the community, that volunteers are being turned away. Is there a specific reason? I know there's a need, but is there a specific reason?
Not being turned away. We're taking all of the information for those who are interested, whether they were previously there and have been working with the shelter, or if they're brand new. So our front desk staff, if someone comes in and says, I'm really interested in volunteering, they take their information. What we've been doing is really working on where those key positions are. So is it a shelter helper? Is it an adoption helper? Is it, when we go a little bit further, can they help transport? So it's looking at what programs we want to set up for the long-term success. So really building that program, and that's what we've been working on. We're kind of in the final review, but if we're going to be bringing on another manager, really like to have their input as well to have that.
So do you have, out of the top of your head, do you know an amount of volunteers currently? And I'm just going to say volunteers, dog walkers, for example.
Every day is different. I would say there is a key group of about 20 to 25.
Yeah. And so just basically going back again, touching on what Councilmember Brown said, policies and procedures also mentioned by Councilmember Campos and everyone up here really, once you've established your policies and procedures, volunteers coming to you for, just offering a few hours of their day to walk a dog, to give them a bath, to, just help out with the adoptions, that would be great. It's just really, I had more comments written down. If you could just kind of open it up, or as soon as you're ready to open it up for volunteers to come in, if you can just post that on your social media, make it to where those individuals on your waiting list that want to be volunteers are also bringing in other volunteers. The idea is not to take over what you're doing, what the city is doing, but really help and assist and really step in to take some of that load that you and your staff are doing. Comments from Councilmember Milne?
I just want to say if you needed a council representation for a board, I'd be willing to volunteer on that.
Any further questions or comments?
Madam Mayor, if I could, I can shed maybe just a little light on that management or the ACA stuff. I just don't want. I know we're running late, so I don't want to get off way off on the subject. But I just wanted to clarify that the ACA is a management committee, and the reason why it's a management committee is because it's the city managers or their designee from each of the cities that actually are assist the operating jurisdiction, who is the city of Pasco, with the management functions so that we're all getting buy-in. So it is truly an executive branch function, not so much or not at all a legislative function. Their roles, when you look in the ILA, their roles, the members of that committee are to be communicating back with their councils. Now, if we want to set up another way to provide that, we could do that. We just got to be careful, because when we start putting representatives together, all of a sudden now we have open public meetings, we have all those things too. So currently, in its current form, it's a management committee for truly the executive branch function.
Perfect, thank you. Comment from Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
So, Mr. Ferguson, I appreciate that clarification, and I think that expands on what Mr. Zabel was saying earlier. One thing that was called for by a number of community members was some public oversight in some form or fashion So this maybe it would take the form of an advisory committee or an oversight committee or something, that some sort of steering committee that can at a much higher level than the operational, maybe separate from this board, if this board is the correct board to. I don't think we're all interested in getting into the operational details on a regular basis. Something like that, I guess, is what I'm proposing. There needs to be a better visibility, and there's been a strong cry for more public visibility into this. And obviously, as council members, that would be a good role for us. But also potentially, maybe this is something that we get concerned citizens, and we set up as something that there's appointees to from our communities and such, to make sure that visibility is there and the questions can be asked, so people have a conduit for that. It's a proposal and thought, as Mr. Zabel said, and I really appreciate Mr. Ferguson you clarifying that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Thank you so much for presenting tonight. We'll move on to our next item on the agenda, ordinance and resolution, budget amendment, and approval of behavioral health personal services agreement with Awareness Consulting and Training, LLC. And we have, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, Fire Chief
That's okay.
up here. I was looking at the crowd.
That's okay, Mayor, Madam Mayor and Council. Actually, Deputy Chief Dunbar will speak real briefly on this, and it's a formalizing of discussion we had with Council earlier this year on some use of some ARPA funds for community health worker programs.
Yes, good evening, Council, Madam Mayor, Council members. Real quickly, we talked to you back in June about this, about applying some of the ARPA funding that would identified to the mental and behavioral health response aspect. What we bring to you tonight is a resolution and an ordinance. The ordinance adds $25,000 to the budget for this year for the contract with, and I always forget the name because it's Cameron Ford Myers Group, agreement with Awareness Consulting and Training, LLC, to provide some supervision and additional resources to our Pasco Resource Navigator program. What we're looking to do is have a PSA with them to provide that supervision, as well as some nurse practitioner that allows some additional medical oversight, some mental and behavioral awareness training and management, while we wait for the two counties to put together their immediate response teams. Even once they get the immediate response teams in place, the PRN or the Resource Navigator programs would still take the long-term case management. So that's kind of where we're at. Looking at a 5-year contract, total cost of about $625,000 between now and then, over the next 5 years. So how's that for brief?
Very brief, thank you very much. Any questions or comments from council? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Barajas, and thank you for the brief presentation. So my concern is actually, I'm surprised at how low the dollar sign is per year. These are pretty highly sought after positions, and I was surprised that $150K a year would be sufficient to cover the labor for that for a number of roles, if I understood correctly.
Yeah, we've actually talked with Cameron and the group, and he's got a plan, he's identified it, and you're right, one of the issues is those individuals don't get paid a lot of money. So even though it's one of those things, he's identified several individuals to provide kind of a consultation where we get a little bit of this one, a little bit of this one, so it's not one person for that. So we kind of spread the cost and manage it in that manner. So yeah, it is fairly inexpensive, but he believes it can be done for that cost, especially with some of the resources we already have in place as well.
All right, I guess with our ARPA funds, I know that we earmarked a bit more of this for Chief Gear and his and services along those lines. I would hate to be underfunding this. The need is so strong right now that I'm concerned that this is really too low of a number. And I hate being up here saying that, but the reality is that I'm not seeing, and perhaps you are, the speed of movement from the counties that would give me the assurances that we don't need to fund more of the services ourselves in the interim. And so I'd be I'll make the statement, I would be amenable to this number increasing if we have the ARPA funds available to make sure that we have adequate services. I'm concerned this is not enough.
Well, in our PRN contract it would be in addition to this. We already have that in place with Consistent Care. We have one full-time PRN now and an intern position that was funded by them. Yeah, and we also have some access to some other funding we're trying to negotiate with Greater Columbia Accountability of Health. I have to always trying to remember, it's GCash is how I know it. So we're mixing a bunch of different dollars together to make this work right now.
Okay, I appreciate that. If you end up with a spot where you think that this is not going to meet our needs, or we're doing the Pasco thing of the past where we lowball everything and try to just make it work, this is an area of strong need in our community, and I would hate to undersell it. So you have my support for if we need to look at that more. I won't speak for this council, but I'll speak for myself that this is really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Campos.
I just want to back up that need. I was actually at the Pasco Police Citizens Academy, and I got to have a presentation by Mr. Fordmeyer just earlier this evening. And he addressed and went over the numbers on just how dire a need more resources like this are in our community. And I would echo Mayor Pro Tem Maloney's call for evaluating whether this is enough. You know, we're starting to kind of breach. We're getting a lot of other potential services that are coming our way, maybe early next year, and it would be nice to be able to see just capitalizing on everything we can.
Thank you for that. Again, thank you, Chief Gear, Chief Dunbar. And I would echo what council members have said. I know that you are in partnership with other agencies to help support the need, support the staffing. But it is a huge need, and we've been talking about this for some time now. So if you want to come back and bring us a bigger proposal, we are open to looking further into that. But again, thank you for your presentation, and again, thank you to the agencies that are supporting this program.
Thank you. Yeah, and that'll be part of the ongoing scope and review, I think, is seeing what we need, and if we need to come back and adjust it, we certainly will.
Thank you so much. Ma'am. So we are now at our last item on the agenda, resolution appointment process for city boards and commissions, city manager, city clerk. Oh my goodness. It is the end of a long, it is the end of a long meeting. So city clerk, Deborah Borum.
Thank you. Well, as you know, we talked about this briefly last week at the end of the meeting, so I won't go into a lot of detail. I'll just briefly talk about what was included in this proposed resolution. The updates include the recruitment process was moved from the city manager's office to the city clerk's office in 2020, and of course in 2020 when the coronavirus pandemic occurred, we had to make changes to the process of recruiting and then interviewing boards and commissions applicants. So the changes are we now have a subcommittee that will be the city, the mayor and 2 council members. They'll review the applications and determine the candidates to interview. Then that subcommittee will go ahead and conduct the interviews. Then the mayor will make the determination of the appointment or reappointments, notifying staff, and those appointments and reappointments will be placed on the next available council meeting, where council will continue to do what they've done, which is confirm the appointments or reappointments by majority vote of the quorum present. So that's what's available, and we're going to be putting this on the agenda next week for your approval.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Very brief. Thank you for that. Any questions regarding that process? Seeing none, thank you again. We'll move on to our next item on the agenda, item H, recap of recent retail sales of cannabis listening sessions.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. So we didn't have necessarily an agenda report on this. This was just to give the council an opportunity to discuss what they might have heard during the listening sessions. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney noted there was very good attendance by the council members in those sessions, as well as the sessions themselves had very good attendance. I think the session previous week out at HAPO approached 70 or so members of the public, and then the one last week varied a little bit, but I think we're 50 to 50-ish, 45 to 55 at that one. So I think very well attended, a lot of public comment, both went about 2 hours. And with that, I'll quit rambling and allow council to talk about what they might have heard and what else they might need to move this issue forward.
Thank you. And that's really what we want to hear, how we should move forward. Councilmember Campos.
I'll keep this brief. I attended the listening session at the Pasco Police Training Center. It was well attended. I was able to filter through enough of the information. I can tell what was stuck to the facts, and I think I'm ready to make a decision on this. I don't need to know anymore.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you. I attended both listening sessions, heard a lot, I've read a lot of studies. The police chief sent us over some more information. I've read not all the source documentation of that, but most of it, as well as other information sent by the community. So I'm pretty well gelling around a decision myself. The one thing I would like to see and would help me understand of how to move forward the best would be a presentation by the Liquor Control Board, or Liquor and Cannabis, I forget what they're called now, the LCB or equivalent. I would love to hear what they do to regulate and also to, in terms of their approval of licenses and allowing a shop to open. What is their role in any of that, and considering things like distances and things like that? Because I think I understand that, but I'd love to hear from them directly. So if there's any way we could get an LCB presentation in the next week or so, I'd be very amenable to that. Mr. Zabel, do you think that's plausible?
We can make contact and see, yes.
Great. I think that's for me is the last piece of information that I haven't already been provided. I've got some more reading to do. Thank you.
Councilmember Brown and Councilmember Milne.
Both sessions were nicely attended. There was a lot of information. But when you get done with all the facts, that's what counts. I understand emotion and passion. That's very important also. When you're passionate about what you have and what you're surrounded with, you cannot exclude that. But again, you put that and the facts together, it's time for a decision. I think we pondered long enough on this. We're in a camp where I call it Camp Winfalooza. So we have to make a decision and put this thing to bed and live with what our decision is and move forward for healthy business in Pasco and to respond to our constituents in a fair amount of time. I think, again, I'm going to reiterate that. I think we pondered enough. It's time for a decision as soon as possible. That's end of my comment.
Thank you. Councilmember Milne.
I think Councilman Brown said it very well what I was going to say, so I'll just say that I'm ready also for the vote, and yeah, as soon as possible.
Thank you. Well, that's short and sweet. But I agree. We've been opening up the opportunity for the community to come and speak and give their opinions. We appreciate the attendance at the forums, the opportunity. They did actually take the opportunity. Not only that, but we also received a lot of emails, hearing both sides. A lot pro and a lot against. But I think we've received an overwhelming support to move forward and lift the ban and allow retail cannabis selling. Again, with consideration of hearing or seeing a presentation, hopefully by the board, we'll be able to make that final step. But I think we're actually there. Do you have any comments, City Manager?
I just was confirming that a majority wants to take the time to see if we can't get the Liquor Control Board folks here. So looks like we have some head nods. One no.
I'd like to expedite this. I think we've spent enough staff time on this. I think the Liquor Control Board is going to confirm what we've heard.
Okay. Any nods, head nods out here?
And fair enough, I don't want to delay our taking action on this. If this is going to take extra weeks, I would like to make a decision quickly as well. So, yeah.
Okay, so I guess the presentation from the liquor board is no longer needed. Majority council here is ready to move forward with the next steps. And what would those next steps be?
That is an excellent question, because that's exactly what I was about to get to. I was like, so, we got 31 flavors here, so, we need to know, I'm gonna need to know, and Rick, if he's still here, yeah, he didn't leave, but, yeah, we're gonna need to know, essentially, the way we do it in Pasco is we currently have a code provision, and it is what it is. And then if we're talking about putting up for a vote, whether we want to continue with that code provision, we need to have an ordinance which would modify the PMC to be able to do that, that would strike that provision. Now, you can do that in a multitude of ways. You can just strike that particular code provision. You can strike it and change it to something else. And then there's a lot of options with regard to what those could be with regard to, like we've talked about before, zoning, conditional use permits. There's a lot of different kind of gradations that we can get into there. So maybe that's the next step is the city staff, myself, Mr. White, and the executive team figure out exactly what those options are and present those options so that you can give us some direction about what you want to come back, because there does need to actually be an ordinance that comes back that gets put to a vote. Now, what that ordinance does is pretty open season. Yes, sir.
Can you package that and make it happen?
You mean the multitude of options?
Yes, you were going to get back with the staff, package it, and then can we all ink pen to paper and see what we want to keep and what we want to omit, and then solidify this thing?
Right. Yeah, I think that's exactly what a workshop would be. So I think that's the next best step would be, this is what those options are going to look like, and then we need to take that direction from you so we can come back to a actual regular meeting where you can vote on it. But at this point, there really just needs to be some of those options discussed.
Okay, so
Thank you.
can we schedule it for our next workshop then? Councilmember Campos, you have a comment?
I was just gonna maybe throw something out there, but if you'd like to schedule it for next meeting, again, as we've talked about this, we kind of kicked this off. I mean, yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Next workshop meeting, correct?
Sorry, I was just conferring with Mr. White. I missed that part. Sorry.
So council here is ready to move forward and discuss it at our next workshop meeting.
Great. And my concern was I was concerned about us having drafted legislative documents for each of those options. And Mr. White reminded me that that's not what we're doing. So we're ready to come back and figure out what those are before we spend that time. So I think that will shorten the process. I was looking at it maybe a little too broadly.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. Looks like we have a plan.
Just, if I can interrupt, just in the past, Mr. Ferguson, I believe for various actions we've taken made a resolution as a council to direct staff to move forward on preparing an ordinance and such. Would that save you time and energy on putting together a variety of options, or do we feel like the options are small enough that there's not going to be a significant amount of additional time to help us understand some of this? I guess I'm just trying to figure out how we don't exercise staff too much, and also come to a decision so we stop having to talk about this so much.
We'll save time by being able to workshop this and be able to know exactly what council is looking for. It won't be binding, obviously, but at that point, we'll know exactly what we need to come back with, and it's just a matter of making that happen. But we'll spend a whole lot more time, effort, and energy putting those options together in formal status so that you can then pick one or not. I mean, we'll save more time by knowing exactly what you're looking for.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Any further questions, comments, discussion? All right, let's make it happen. Okay, and with that, we move on to our next item on the agenda, item 7, miscellaneous council discussion. City manager.
Just a couple quick items. One, we have a fall festival on Saturday, October 22nd. Wanted to get that out 4 to 8 at Volunteer Park. Fire station open house scheduled for October 29th. This would be at Fire Station 84 from 2 to 6. We know it's been open a while, but we had really not able to go and celebrate the opening of that fire station due to COVID, and so we're in a place where it's a little bit more safe. And then Council Member Milne mentioned earlier tonight Mr. Pidborik, attending with him a community meeting and put the news out. And we had done by press release earlier in the day of John's promotion from senior engineer to city engineer. So that's effective 10/17. Previously, obviously, new director and a new finance manager and Griselda Garcia. So a lot of promotions this last several weeks. So just to note those.
Thank you for that. And I just want to say congratulations to our new finance director, Darcy Buckley, Griselda, and to Mr. John. Again, congratulations on your promotions. I do have one last bit to add. It's an invite. This Friday, October 14th, 10 to 2 p.m. at Hapo Center. Come and have coffee with your local first responders. It's called Coffee and Arms. Your contact will be, if you have any questions, Area Resource Officer Saul Mendoza. And he can be reached at 509-727-7983. Again, it's called Coffee and Arms, Coffee with First Responders at Hapo Center. And I'll share that with Ms. Deb here to have in her records. Okay, and we're almost done. I swear we're almost done. But we have an executive session. Consideration of site selection or acquisition of real estate purchase or lease in likelihood that disclosure would increase price per RCW 42.30.110(1)B and discuss collective bargaining unit negotiations per RCW 42.30.140(4)A for 20 minutes. So it is now 10:31. We will be back at 10:51.
We do need to continue our discussion from earlier tonight as well.
And we also have need to
Executive session, yeah.
to discuss
litigation.
further our earlier discussion. So
On
will that
regarding
extend
litigation,
that to?
20. Let's do 25 minutes total.
Okay, we'll say 25 minutes. It is now 10:58 and we are back from executive session, and with no further items on the agenda, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.